20 minutes or so through my own trajectory about teaching social entrepreneurship. And you know, I got involved in the teaching side in 2002. And you know, the world in 2002 was obviously very different. You had different president then, for example. Other things were different as well. But in the field of social entrepreneurship in particular, there was some activity in social entrepreneurship education in North America, but still very little comparatively to now. And certainly there was no such thing in Europe. And you know, at the time I was head of research at the Schwab Foundation, which is another organization that identifies social entrepreneurs and supports them. And we thought, well, you know, it's actually not good that we don't have any dedicated teaching capabilities in Europe. The foundation is based in Geneva. And thought, well, we need to do something about it. So one idea was to say, well, you know, let's link up with the university, in that case, University of Geneva, rather than got an appointment and developed a course, which I taught there until 2010. Then 2004, another university came and said, by the way, we'd also like you to teach this, so I did then 2 universities at the same time. The other element was we realized that actually we couldn't find any good course content in terms of cases, because we felt, you know, we are, of course, you know, there was the social enterprise initiative at our business school, for example, so it's not that there were no case studies about entrepreneurship in the social sector, but we felt that they were way too few, and that they would, what was an issue for us at the time, wouldn't appropriately cover international audiences. So we thought, well, we need to do something about that, and then, you know, linked up with the SESi Business School, and got them to start producing case studies on social entrepreneurs that were not based in North America. And what I'd like to do is just to illustrate for a second, especially since we have lunch, I think you deserve a video. You know, what the challenge really was. And I have a video here of one person that at the time I was working with very actively, a social entrepreneur. His name is Gisèle Yeton-Ben. And one of the first things we did was actually produce a case study of her. But let's look at the video for a second. Let's see if YouTube cooperates. No. Oh, yeah. Aha. Well, we don't have internet, I guess.
Just retry it.
Oh, yes.
Global X interviews social entrepreneurs who tackle some of the world's biggest problems. They are pioneers of innovation that benefit humanity.
Not to make you deaf too quick enough.
She's based in Cameroon, Central Africa. I'm a founding member of ASAF, which means Association for Support to Women Entrepreneurs. And this is 21 years that I've start this organization to support entrepreneurship development among women. We do the entrepreneurship supporting program through microfinancing, vocational training programs, and in the rural areas, we also do some solar electrification and developing energy through the biodiesel to develop entrepreneurs, to support entrepreneurship development in the rural areas. One day, one lady came and said to me that she would like to become a Cisco engineer. And I said, well, you know, you need to have this degree, etc. You need to be, to have some basics and so on. And she said, you know, at this age, I'm willing to invest and gain that basics. And she just turned completely the way we were doing our program. Instead of just taking the curriculum and give it to the people, we start seeing how we could upgrade the level of the people so that they would follow the program that we have been, doing at our center. And through this packaging, the way we have packaged our program, today almost all the Cisco engineers in Cameroon are women from our institution. What really characterizes social entrepreneurs is passion and love. It's a very passionate field, and you have to be prepared to really see how you balance your personal life and your job, because some of us have spent 21 years working and working, but we are doing it with a lot of passion. That's why we are working.
Global X is also on Social Edge. At Social Edge,
So, this was one of the social entrepreneurs I was working with at the time. And maybe interesting to notice also, this video was made in 2005, so it's a bit dated maybe, but the kinds of things that being part of the social entrepreneurship network implies for someone like her was that, she would no longer get arrested, for example, because, some people who are pattern changers inevitably make trouble as well. In a country like Cameroon that may not be, very much desired by the government, but once you start going to Davos and you have the cell phone of someone in the government, then it helps with the police as well. So this was one of the social norms we're working with, and my ambition at the time was to say, we would like to cover content like this, so not, I would say Harvard Business School type, very established social businesses. And we would like to design a course around social entrepreneurship as it is meaningful for, a cosmopolitan but European audience. That was in 2002. And out of that came then the first course. And for the first course, for this pilot course, I was asking myself a few questions. One is, clearly, we need to explain what social entrepreneurship is. I think there may be some semantic confusion even, or many discourses already still now, but think about it 10 years ago. I remember well a panel on which I was sitting at some point, University of St. Gallen, where someone in the audience said, "Oh, now I get it, social entrepreneurship. You are working on humane outplacement policies." I said, "No, not quite. It's not really the thing that we're doing. We're not helping large corporates to offload people through social plans." So that was the level of discussion at the time, 10 years ago. So clearly, when you do a course, you need to think about some of the basics and how to cover those. At the same time, I realized that even then, there were many different views of what social entrepreneurship is. And I felt it's important that students themselves develop critical knowledge, and that we put, the tensions in front of them so that they can navigate. The second element of expectation was, and this is something that came out of discussion also with the university administration at the time, is, well, this course should be different than a traditional class. At the same time, no one had any idea how it should be different, just different and very impactful, whatever that means. But clearly, when we say different, in that case, that must mean there must be some element of personal discovery. And I think what I found very powerful about the panel that Chris just put together is, I think you see this in action. This is exactly the kinds of things that I've also seen unfold over the past 10 years, where students look for a narrative that can guide their own efforts, that can bring, disparate interests, activities together under one roof that enables them to leverage, their skills, their passions to do something meaningful. So, the idea was, okay, that should be part of it as well. And the other point is, I was teaching at HESi Geneva at the time. They were about to graduate. So it would be somewhat irresponsible to raise expectations about this, growing new field without providing any concrete ideas as to defining your own ambition level, as well as potential insertion points actually into this space. If you were serious about it and wanted to do something about it. So that led to a course structure, basically partially focusing on case studies. Now, some of the case studies, as I said, we had wrote or had commissioned. And I have some here. I mean, as you can see, it's not very US-centric actually. I mean, we had cases from Brazil, Kenya, Cameroon, I've showed you already, a company in the UK that actually produces wind-up radios that can be used in emergency situations. But also some conceptual work, because I felt at the time that just doing, even if we were in an economics department, just focusing on skills and on one and illustrating with cases wasn't enough, because it's a new field that's coming together. So you need to treat it as such. You need to think about cross-cutting issues such as impact measurement, or cross-cutting issues. How does this relate to globalization, one way or the other? I mean, if someone like Gisèle Guiton-Ben, for example, can now execute her work better than before, it's because of the power of globalization. It enables her to be part of networks and work with, say, companies like Cisco, for whom she set up a networking academy and other things. And finally, the third vector was, and I continue to think that this is fairly relevant, but now often can be dealt with in different ways, is giving students a sense of who they should look to if they're interested in continuous learning. Which sources of knowledge and expertise should they be looking to? Because this is not an established, it wasn't at the time, certainly 10 years, an established discipline. And therefore, self-learning and the ability to, again, uncover information and evaluate that is very important. Now, at the time, as I said, I was heading the research at the Schwab Foundation also. So we covered that as well. The case, how did this foundation actually get involved in this space, and what did it mean? The first course, I have to say, was very interesting, because inevitably for a first course, you don't really know why students sign up for it, because no one's taken it before, so they can't really ask their friends. At the same time, we didn't get a large group. We got 15 people, but they must have done very good PR, because in subsequent years it was much larger. And the university administration, anyway, found it very exciting. They liked it. And so basically, on that basis, I then continued to develop the course. But of course, over the years, the world also changed. I mean, social entrepreneurship became much more prominent. Ashoka grew tremendously, for example, in a number of fellows, other ancillary activities around it. Also, convening places where social entrepreneurs could come together and where, in a sense, new collaborations would be forged, came on stream. For example, Jeff Stoll funded at Oxford University, the SESi Business School, funded a program and a research center out of which the School World Forum then emerged. Very interestingly, also in 2005, a totally different approach to social entrepreneurship and practice emerged, the Hub. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the Hub around here. The model there is actually not an organization selects a social entrepreneur by examining their track record, as Ashoka would be doing, or Skoll would be doing, or Schwab would be doing, but it's really a self-select, so it's a select-in model where you have creative spaces with shared offices and, say, pro bono services around it, where people actually who are interested in becoming part of a social entrepreneur cluster join essentially for a very small membership fee, like in a shared office. It's very interesting because it's a spatial community as opposed to one where you have a quality, in a sense, the quality management label. So that came as well and grew tremendously. I mean, I think there are now more than 40 hubs around the world like that. Then, of course, the whole impact investing dimension came on board. I'll get into that a little bit later. And then in 2008, with the financial crisis, that also hit some social entrepreneurs. So for me, what that meant in the years from, say, 2003 to 2006, the situation was there wasn't a lot of social entrepreneurship teaching, so it was still important to cover the space. So for me, it's certainly specializing what was difficult, for the simple reason that, then people say, well, but we don't understand the rest and we can't take a course in it, so why don't you try to put everything into one course, which is always very difficult. And students in general had relatively little understanding about the space. So enthusiasm, yes, interest, but not necessarily a sense of who the actors were, what was relevant knowledge, what were the cases that you might be familiar with even before you start, and so on. And of course, because of the setup, so I was teaching University of Geneva and University of St. Gallen, but really in a business or economics context, there was a desire that case studies be used, which I personally don't think are a bad thing. However, one of the experiences, again, I'd like to reiterate, is cases really don't teach everything. And I hope that my colleagues in business schools will forgive me for saying that, because I mean at HBS, for example, it's so extreme that we even learn macroeconomic theory through a case study. That, in my view, is I would say questionable. So I think real readings, so to speak, that don't have cases, also rather than always try to blend the two. One of the things that was very valuable in terms of driving, again, let's say, real insertion abilities for students and motivation was selective use of social entrepreneurs as visitors, essentially, coming for a session, explaining 20 minutes what they do. Ideally, their organization would be part of the project list for the term project, so you can see firsthand what they're doing, and then also select yourself into that group if you're interested and do some work with them. I also invited people who fund social entrepreneurs selectively, so that one understands their motivations. And in this first phase, assignments were really, I wanted to make sure that students understand the basics, so there were some written assignments on that, and then we apply them mainly through what you could call, due diligence exercises on the social entrepreneurs. So what we would be doing is select a backlist of social entrepreneurs who are willing to go through that process, who would share quite a bit of information, and then really have a student who analyze these organizations, analyze the structural strengths, the model, the intervention model, how to substantiate that, but also hopefully what some of the areas of improvement were, which again generated a certain enthusiasm because it enables students to feel powerful, feeling that they're actually adding some value. And one of the experiences I had in that period was that social entrepreneurs, while they're of course very, I would say, often very inspiring people who achieve a lot of things, often have relatively fragile organizations because they're so busy that they don't really have time necessarily to think about, say, second-tier leadership development, IT, procurement, you name it. So that actually it's quite valuable if you have a focused student group zooming in on some of these issues, not because it will resolve everything, that's, I think, overestimating what they could be achieving, but because they create transparency in a structured way around something that is of value to further organizational growth. So that was the first leg, so to speak, which I would term the one-on-one approach. Then, of course, the world changed in the meantime, right? We had the Uni of Microcredit in 2005. Margaret Yunus and the Green Bank got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. Impact investing emerged. I was fortunate to be part of these conferences that the Rockefeller Foundation convened, out of which the term impact investing came, and the Global Impact Investing Network and some other initiatives. And one of the things that became very clear then in that context to me was that while we need to focus on real activities, so real social entrepreneurs, how they operate, finance is really a very difficult space, even for successful social entrepreneurs who you would think shouldn't have any difficulties in raising additional resources, who are recognized by, say, Ashoka, Skoll, or others. This takes them, of course, to one next level, because it often comes with some additional funding or some immediate benefits. But the structural challenge of how to actually then get unrestricted funding for business development, for example, persisted. So I got more and more interested actually in the whole issue of impact investing. And when we think about impact investing, some of you may be skeptical and say, well, haven't we heard all of this before? I mean, the idea that you would invest for social and economic value at the same time. How is that different, say, from mission investing or mission-related investment and so on? I would say it's a little bit like the case of social entrepreneurship. Not everything is new. I mean, intellectually, the idea that you deploy capital to provide a positive impact as well as a financial return, I mean, that certainly wasn't created in 2007 on the shores of an Italian lake. That's ridiculous. But the concept gained a lot of traction. And I think that's equally what excites me about social entrepreneurship. It's about the momentum behind it. because it tends to drive people who are not satisfied with the status quo, who think, well, actually, you can make this bigger. You can draw more resources, financial resources, also in funding positive social change. Of course, the corresponding element then is if we say impact investing, we should start developing some idea about what the impact looks like. Because otherwise, how is that different from investing other than maybe sounding better? So I try to cover that as well. The other big change as the 2000s unfolded was really that we had more and more convening platforms, pointed to that already, and aggregator organizations, intermediary organizations that would actually find and fund social entrepreneurs. So good thing from a teaching point of view, because it means you get more and more examples in essence that you could choose from. And for students who actually want to do things, you have actually more and more entry points for them, provided that you give them a sense of how this universe, this support universe of this space looks like. The other point, I think it was made earlier by one of the participants, is of course one other thing that changed over the course of the past 10 years is really more and more research came out. Some of it adjacent to social entrepreneurship, as we probably understand in this room. I mean, say the whole discussion around the base of the pyramid, for example. But some of it also, really quite clearly on social entrepreneurship. I mean, people at Duke, for example, have been very productive, putting out research. Journals were being created, handbooks. I mean, so you, again, from a practical point of view, exciting because it gives you more choices in terms of materials you can work with. And I think that's, for me, probably the biggest change over the course of the 2000s, that when I started teaching social entrepreneurship, it was really in a context of scarcity of inputs. So we had few case studies and they were biased. We had almost no conceptual materials, so very little research. And we had, I would say, we had a relatively low common denominator of established understanding of the space or how the space would look like. Completely different now, 10 years later, where it's much more about navigating what's out there so that you can actually, I would say, maximize the positive impact you have on your students, which is also a challenge. Now, the financial crisis, of course, changed a lot of things, also for social entrepreneurs. One of the organizations that I had covered in the early years, Free Play Energy, it's a very interesting case because so we had the CEO over a few times sort of in different years, commissioned a case study on the organization that was published by ESA Business School. And so that was sort of the poster boy social entrepreneur, essentially. Very interesting model. I mean, you produce wind-up radios. These wind-up radios can be used in complex emergency situations, say the floods in Mozambique, for example. And part of the distribution was through, say UN-type, providers. So clearly, a very interesting organization with a good product, all sorts of things around it, recognized social entrepreneur, but maybe almost too successful. So they started thinking, should we go public? We're being so successful, why don't we list on the stock exchange? I remember that we had a project on that once, and we were thinking about the pros and cons about going public. Well, they did go public at the end. And the problem was that the stock did not perform very well. Then at some point the company was sold. It would then, under the new buyer, the company went bankrupt. So very interesting case, sort of, if you cover that over the years, because it also shows that not everything is going to work out, obviously. And it's very important, for, when you navigate these topics and, in a sense, package them for students, that we really look at the points where this intersection between social entrepreneurship in a classical sense and say the larger globe, the larger economy, the larger polity, because as social enterprises become successful, they will bump up against these barriers and they will need strategies to deal with that. So what I did basically, starting in 2007, was focusing much more. My courses much more around impact investing, partially because there were more courses. So, there were colleagues teaching other things as well. So you didn't really have to try to, enable everyone to navigate. The other interesting development on the content side was that, So I had developed basically a group of social enterprises with whom we had been doing projects over the years. The needs that they were developing were becoming also more and more sophisticated. So, just doing a due diligence is interesting, so say we did that in 2003, but, say in 2005 they were saying, okay, that's great, we realized that in order to grow, we need to cut the cost of our micro-irrigation pump in case of Kickstart. Now, what are you guys recommending? Should we produce this in China, in India? We don't have time to calculate this. Why don't you guys do it? So it's, the good thing about a relationship is, of course, that people come with questions, especially if it's a multi-year relationship. But that increasingly meant that we needed much more focused assignments, in fact. And also, I would say, very good assessment of students' capabilities. Because, when these things when the assignments become more complicated and the students cannot deliver, ultimately everyone needs some time. One of the things I continued to do was to invite selectively social entrepreneurs, social investors, even though not very many. I mean, really just a few, because otherwise it's all around the entertainment aspect. These people are often very inspiring, and it's difficult to get the content covered. So one of my pieces of advice would be put real people in front of your students, but not too many of them, because otherwise it's very difficult to really get cohesion, red thread through your curriculum. Maybe just quickly as we're wrapping up, and I think then move into questions. So I've now sort of two setups. One is really focused around thinking through the things that I personally think are most important in this space. One, yes, of course, we need to give people a very quick intro into how this field came together, what its DNA looks like. Secondly, then, the question is really about impact. Social entrepreneurship, needs to make a case, I think, that it drives superior impact. That's the hypothesis under which we work. Many social entrepreneurs do that, but let's look at how that actually works out and in practice. How does this work out with grants? How does this work out if I use commercial or quasi-commercial, say, impact investing capital? And to what extent can I drive impact also by engaging with public sector entities? And then when we talk about scale, well, scale obviously means it's not just bigger is better per se. It means organizational development is required. It means that we need to have some kind of sense of what we're achieving. Are we managing quality? The whole issue of reporting standards. And finally, the element, well, if social entrepreneurs, which is my personal conviction, are part of a larger story, are the innovators that drive change on a much larger scale, then it's interesting to explore how you can actually, what the interlinkages are with these other groups. So that's one setup. The other one is very different. The other one is more bottom-up, thinking through, okay, that's great. So, dear student, you have an idea, you'd like to do something, wonderful. Let's do it in a way that is structured. So, if you want to do a business plan, good. But let's be clear, there's no point in, I'll say just talking. I want you to use certain skills, work in teams, and actually, examine specific opportunities, and maybe you may act on that and put this in practice or not. That's really, of course, up to you. So that's the second setup. The assignments, as I mentioned, have experimented with lots of types of assignments over the years. Due diligence reports we actually do less now because the organizations are more sophisticated, but it used to be very powerful in the first years. Business plan writing, resonates a bit with, I think, the level of energy of your students here. I found that when you give students the opportunity to, articulate themselves in a small team around an idea and then challenge them to say, okay, but let's not document this up to a point where we can actually do something with it, that they really bootstrap and come up with quite good products often. And this is good for team building. We also did venture competitions with GSBC, for example, in Geneva. That's a good thing, definitely. The question is just, it's time consuming as well. So I think one needs to really think through what the setup is. I think the advantage that you have here is that you're building quite a powerful setup with several courses, a dedicated group really through Chrissy who can support you and help guide you. So I think giving, again, students a opportunity to participate is great. I think class assignments are inevitable. You have to have that. You have to ask them about certain things to, evaluate or reproduce them to make sure that certain content is covered. What students always liked most was really working with social practical projects. There I have to say I've had very mixed outputs. Some very good, some not so good, and not necessarily for the wrong reasons. I mean, it could be things like, you have a fairly good group, but for some reason something happens with the social entrepreneur in question. So all of a sudden they're extremely busy with something, and what was agreed up front in terms of the kind of, say, FaceTime or internet time, I guess, you'd be getting, you don't get it. Because again, these can be organizations that are quite stretched. So, if person X is not going to take up the phone or write the email, well, person Y may not be doing that because he or she may not be there to do it. So one of the things I found is that it's always important to define a backup plan and be quite upfront about this. And say, the opportunity is to work on something real. However, let's understand, the real world is dynamic. And that means, we should disaggregate this into several elements, some of which you can do yourself, for some of which you need, or in a small group, for some of which you will need the social entrepreneur, but for whatever reason this is not forthcoming, well then we switch to plan B. And I've had good experiences with that. I think it's about managing expectations. The things that work, certainly in my experience, and again, this is really maybe a European, not just European, but also have a lot of Asians in the MBA program, and people from not so many Americans actually, a few handful. People like the cases and the practical assignments. As in any group, it's important to ask them whether they've read the cases, of course. But I would say, if I compare to standard teaching, the level of engagement was always consistently much higher than in standard courses. What I found important is to early on try to connect and unlock students' enthusiasm, asking them, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Why are you sitting in this class? And then allow for some degree of I would say, improvisation on the assignments. So for example, not force people, I don't know how you do the groups here, but force them to be sitting in the same group as in any other. In some schools it's like actually you're allocated to a group per semester and then you have to do all assignments in that group in different courses. I didn't find that valuable because I thought it's better to get people to work around a topic that they are interested in, with people with whom they want to work. Because it's in a sense their time. It's a more aspirational course. Being very clear about the state of theory, I think is valuable. Theory is important, but it's work in progress. I mentioned already money and real activity, this connection. Students found that interesting as well, because inevitably they would start thinking, okay, if I wanted to do this, how would I actually get it funded? And therefore, tended to be more interested in financial issues than if you just make it abstract. And then, of course, again, so we were in, SESi MBA program, so, it's inevitably a mix of disciplines that goes into it, but everyone as a common denominator is getting some business education, is interested in business education, so that there's a certain basis in terms of practical skills on the assignments that you can work with. Things that I've seen that don't work really well is, teaching social entrepreneurship in a way as a standard course, because I think a lot of the knowledge in this space, in this discipline, is really being codified, is being created now. And it's a space that develops very fast. I mean, very often actually practice is ahead of academia because it's so dynamic. And often the guests, the visitors, are a good way to bring that into evidence. And as I mentioned before, in some cases we had social entrepreneurs who were great people, but in that semester they just, thank God they didn't get a grade because they didn't perform. They just had other issues, and that's fine. One just needs to manage expectations. The other thing is, it's a great topic, but I would say the human condition still applies. We still had groups that were unproductive because students had issues with each other. I think that's not going to be different. That's just how things are. And the same thing, of course, many good ideas, many sort of quasi-student ventures come out of it, but it doesn't mean that all of them actually fly. I have this on another slide. I think one of the things, though, that I found empowering is that very often we produced results, outputs that were actually used. I remember we had a large German foundation once we worked with, and the term paper, the student term paper, actually ended up being an important input for their board to think about a strategic review of what they should be doing in this space. And that's powerful. Or if you think about, which I mentioned, the hub, the setup. Well, we had in one of the courses a group that said, well, wouldn't it be nice to do something like this in Switzerland? Why don't we do a business plan? So they did a business plan. Out of this then came the hub Zurich, and they raised over $500,000 to get it done. That's really powerful. And I think those are the moments when you feel also as an educator that you are having impact and that you can see. Because very often I think we know that there is an impact because we hear the kinds of conversations with the students before the semester, after the semester, and how they develop, how their views on things develop, but it is still satisfying, I think, also personally for me, if I see things that are tangible, because otherwise, they wander off and contact you for a letter of recommendation every once in a while. But one doesn't really get to see everything unfold. So I find it very exciting that you are so involved here in social entrepreneurship. I'm very impressed by the energy and the level of activity already. And I realize we may have some skeptics. Again, I think it's normally distributed. I just don't know where the mean is. But I can tell you, and again, this is I'm totally biased, but I think it's a good idea to invest your time in this topic because it's a topic where one can have a positive impact on students, and I think it's a topic that has a lot of momentum. So I don't know if you want to. Do you have a few questions? I think we probably have a few minutes to discuss. Otherwise, the next step also before, so while you formulate your questions is, what we'll next do is to basically give you an overview of the Ashoka curriculum guide and point you concretely to if now you want to do a course to the kinds of solutions and to-go points that are at your disposal. Yes?
As you've developed these courses already and you've taught them, what things have you found? I mean, every semester, every professor is always thinking, I wish I had this, and then you try to integrate it. What are the things that you find you need now for the courses going forward that you'd like to figure out where to get them from or develop them?
Well, I mean, one thing is I sometimes wish I had cases on organizations that I think are really good and that are sort of easy to engage with, but I just don't have them. That's one thing. The other thing is I think the power of media is really considerable. Now, there are lots of outfits now that produce videos on social entrepreneurs. The challenge is that often you don't have enough information underlying those videos to be really able to problematize them from a teaching point of view. And what I mean, if I know the organization, I'm willing to use it. But what I try to avoid is to simply celebrate organizations that I don't know well, because even if the School World Forum has made a video on the organization, it doesn't necessarily mean that this organization is as good as it's being portrayed. So quality control, I think, for multimedia is very important. Other than that, the other really exciting tool to have, which we don't have at this point, would be, I would say more standardized tools, impact measurement, for example, that students can run with. But where if they really do a good job, they don't have to come back to me, because I also have then the next course, obviously, but that they can then go to, for example, to say a Rockefeller Foundation and so on, and this body of work is being used by others, so its quality being checked beyond what I could provide in the grading process. So I think those are certain, say, structural things that the space still misses. But that said, there's a lot of stuff that you can work with. Yes?
The areas of community service, community engagement in which I work, do not appear to lend themselves to social entrepreneurship or to making a profit. Things like children's early literacy skills, provision of hydration fluids, supporting immunizations in terms of child education, that sort of thing. Do you think this model works only in the profit-making connection or also in the nonprofit?
No, and I think you're raising an incredibly important point. I mean, one of the things I've consistently emphasized in my courses is this model is hybrid. It's a specific way of solving social problems so that they move from manage the problem to solve the problem. And whether you're operating in the for-profit or the non-profit sector is partially a function of the underlying issue, partially a function of the operating environment, the context. Could be legal context, could be other organizations. And I have to say that's something that is also, again, I think I would say drives motivation among students, because it's exactly as you say, people don't come to these courses necessarily to say, okay, I want to start a new for-profit and also be nice and be loved. That's not the motivation. The motivation is a highly effective way to address social issues. Now, if we're honest about the non-profit sector, I think the non-profit sector does a lot of things wonderful, but its budget is finite. I mean, the US, you have $300 billion of philanthropy. It sounds like a lot of money, but look at the central government spending. It's depending on the presidency, 30 to 50 days of US government spending. So that's one thing. So it's a finite pot. It's grossly insufficient. And secondly, capital allocation costs are quite high. And fundraising is really an issue. The cost of fundraising, cost of grant making. So, one of the things we always do early on in the course is to say, let's not be judgmental here. There are quality organizations in all sectors, but let's identify where the sweet spots are. If you wanted to take it a step further, you could do it. And if this is a non-profit, if you're in the non-profit space, you're really on the business of providing public goods, well, then that means we need to start thinking differently around this. I mean, one of the cases that I like to cover is around the social impact bond, for example, where if you look at the classical, classical say interaction between government and the social sector, and I'm not referring to the US because of this visiting, that's in Europe, then you have a lot of social welfare organizations funded by the welfare state to execute the work. And in many cases, they do very good work. However, there's typically not a performance orientation where you give more resources to the organizations that are more effective, nor is there an interest or ability on the part of governments to actually fund organizational development so that these organizations can become better and better in delivering their services. So the idea of the social impact bond is one where one says, well, how do we orchestrate this value chain differently? What about, okay, you government, you don't have the money nor the time. We're worrying about improving the quality of the organizations that deliver the good in the first place. What if other people do that? What if private capital, for example, comes in with development funding so that organizations can become more effective? Now, if that works, well, the government should be saving taxpayer money. Why is it then unfair to say, if it works, if, say, the private funder has taken all the risks, that they get their capital back plus a certain return on this capital? Right? Those are the kinds of models that articulate for-profit and non-profit, but are really ultimately about how do I deliver a good service in a more effective way so I can include more people. And I think it's very important to stress that. It's not just about for-profits. It doesn't mean everything needs to be looked at as a business, not at all. It's about achieving the most results with resources possible, and see what innovations are there that could be incorporated to drive this process. I can send you some stuff on that if that's interesting. Because I don't know how much time we have to do this. Yes.
When you say solve the problem, I'm confused. Do you mean solve the problem and make the problem go away? Because when you say solve the problem, you usually follow that by talking about how the funding of services or solutions directed at a problem can shift from a kind of governmental model to a for-profit social entrepreneurial model. And so when you say solve the problem, I think of a bigger cultural, social kind of discussion. But what you're talking about is the movement of new kinds of organizations into the sector that we might have wanted the government to be in, and currently nonprofits are in, and we're upset or somehow feel that those activities aren't effective. And so this is a new model that we're talking about that's trying to bridge the gap between what's the other associated with the established nonprofit versus the deficits associated with the government. And so, can you talk to me a little bit more about what you mean when you say solve the problem and how social entrepreneurship is really distinct in terms of that kind of description of what's going on?
Yeah, happy to. When I say solving a problem, it means, obviously not the problem of funding of an organization, but really an underlying social and environmental issue somewhere. So just to stay in that example to make it concrete. So let's assume we're all, like some of the students here, I guess, under 21 years old. We're in the UK, we live in the UK, and we've offended for the first time. Well, the likelihood that we will be within the criminal system within 12 months is 92%. That's tough. And yet, historically, the focus of government funding in the UK is really on putting people, I would say, processing them in the criminal system and keeping them there, as opposed to funding reinsertion and training. Right? So the problem is, we're managing a problem, we're sending these people to prison, keeping them there, as opposed to allocating resources to training them so that the recidivism rate is lower. So social entrepreneurship type intervention is to say, why don't we shift some of that funding, and understood if the government doesn't have any money, we'll find a different way of funding it, to enable those who have offended, who've become criminal, to actually find a meaningful place in society. This will be a mix of counseling, training, and so on. Finding models to do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean new organizations. I think it can mean new organizations if no one is doing it, but it really means stepping up the bar in terms of performance also in existing organizations. And I realize that many of the examples that we put in front of you are new organizations, but there can be social entrepreneurship in existing organizations as well. There's no reason to throw out the baby with the bathtub if overall, it's quite good. I mean, there's something to work with. To come back to that specific example, this is exactly how the idea of the social impact model came about. In 2005, we did a workshop thinking if we wanted to fund better solutions, so to speak, more effective solutions in the social sector, and we know we're budget constrained, we don't have money from the government to do it. Who else could put up the money, and what do we need to put in front of these people so that they do it? And the idea there was to say, well, couple financial returns with social metrics. So if you achieve a social outcome, in this case, if the recidivism rate drops by a certain percentage point, you can calculate it, how much you save, then in that case, well, let's make sure that you, risk-prone investor, get your money back plus a certain financial return. This is just one example, but there are many examples like this where we can either stay within the fixed resource set, so to speak, and of course work on making organizations a bit more effective, or we can think through, well, if we really wanted to cut across it, are there any other things we could be doing to organize the whole solution space differently? And social entrepreneurs are typically people who do that, who have some kind of idea that is pattern changing, and then has a big impact. I'll give you another example because maybe this is too specific. I know many of you, or everyone I guess, but are active in issues around human rights. Well, if you look at the development of the human rights space, organizations like Amnesty, for example, have been incredibly successful and very, very important. The reality, though, is that because of the success of an organization like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch, a space has opened up for governments who've actually signed certain treaties and might be prone to doing things, holding up human rights more, but don't know how, or don't have the technical expertise. So one Ashoka U currently set up an organization called International Bridges to Justice that actually consults with governments so that they can create public defender systems. They've done this in Cambodia, for example. So they actually provide training so governments can uphold the standards to which they've committed themselves. These organizations could never do this if Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and others hadn't done the work before. But that has created an opportunity to think about new kinds of solutions. I don't know, does that illustrate the point? You're nodding, so I hope that's a bit clearer than before. Any other?
Is there another question? I'll wait until after the next.
So just to sum it up, I realize it's a complicated space. I think it's very important that we're not judgmental and that we realize it's an ecosystem in which there are many other actors, many of whom do a lot of good work. But the new kid on the block, so to speak, is social entrepreneurship, and very often it comes with a tremendous power to innovate. And I think to the extent that you can guide your students in understanding the context in which social entrepreneurship operates, give them some examples about things that are innovative, that work, as well as skills, you can give them the choice, I think, to get involved in this space more or not after they've taken the course. That said, I think the voices we had here from the students are not atypical. Students are actively looking for ways to reconcile the many contradictions they see in life, the need to have a professional education, to master certain skills, with a desire to do something that they can be proud of and that is meaningful. And social entrepreneurship is a great entry point to help them achieve that. I think, hopefully everyone's now interested in hearing what kind of resources we can put at your disposition to make these courses happen. I mean, some of them already have them, of course. So I think I'll pass it to Marina for an overview of the resource guide, which is an incredibly valuable instrument because it has actually looked at best practice in social entrepreneurship education and packaged that conveniently for those who want to get involved. Thank you.